All right, last video. Congratulations, you made it this far. Amazing. But let's not pat ourselves in the back too much. We'll do it at the very end of the video. But we're going to now talk about how do we develop the reproductive systems because they're so different from each other. So we're going to talk about the tissues that lead to the different structures. And I've introduced some of these things in the previous two videos, but we're going to get a little more detailed, a little closer view of how someone goes from who knows what to male or female. We're going to talk about the duct systems in the embryo that are the precursors to male and female internal sex organs. We'll talk about some of the hormonal changes that occur as well as secondary sex characteristics we see in both men and women. And again, as I've said in the last two videos, we are talking about the typical development of male and female reproductive systems. There is a bit of a spectrum where people can fall in the range of intersex. And what that looks like can be very different. If you have questions on that kind of stuff, you can ask me. So let's talk about going from your very first cell onward. We're going to start at the very beginning. Day one, fertilization. Sperm and the ovum have combined. We now have a diploid cell that has two sets of chromosomes. We are considered a zygote. That's your very first cell, the fertilized egg. Day one, you are a zygote. That zygote is then going to go through a bunch of divisions from one cell to 2, from 2 to 4, from 4 to 8, from 8 to 16. And the big thing we're doing here is we're dividing, but we're not getting bigger. So we go from one big cell to lots of smaller cells until we get to this what's called a morula, this little ball of 16 cells. We're then going to start to hollow the inside out. Right? So we're going to go from a solid ball to a hollow ball. And from here, we can actually implant in the endometrium. So we go from this, we go to implantation. We'll go through some further development, which we're not going to get crazy detailed in that, because we're mainly going to focus on the reproductive organs. So let's go ahead and get into that with the female reproductive development and kind of what we're going to go through with that. Female development is considered like the default in a way. Now, some people, you'll hear people say, or you'll read people saying like, oh, everybody starts female. And that's not fully what it really means, because we start with generic sex organs, right? However, without intervention, it will continue to develop into a female reproductive system. So not like, we're not saying everybody starts with a vagina. That's not what we're saying with that. We're saying like, if there is no signal given, female development will occur. The only way we develop male reproductive systems is if we have the Y chromosome and the, really not even just the Y chromosome, but in particular the SRY gene, or the sex determining region of the Y chromosome. This particular gene is the driver. And so if someone has the SRY gene and it is functional, they will become male. The Y chromosome is the chromosome that pretty much always has the SRY gene. The X chromosome does not have it. And so this is why if you're XX, you pretty much are going to develop into a female because you don't have the SRY gene, you don't have a Y chromosome. And if you're male, you're XY, you do have the SRY gene, you do develop male. There are some cases where the SRY gene is broken. And so someone who is XY will become female because the SRY gene is not working and female development is the default. There are also cases where an SRY gene may have accidentally been mixed up and got onto an X chromosome, in which case someone who's XX could develop male. If you want more information on those, you can ask me in class. But something just to think about. We have what are called biopotential tissues. These are like the precursor tissues that can become either the male or female parts. And it really comes down to whether or not the person has a functioning SRY gene. There's two duct systems that an embryo has. So every embryo will start with both. And then one of those duct systems is going to break down, leaving only one behind. If you are developing into a female, you will keep your Mullerian duct. So the Mullerian duct will develop female anatomy like the fallopian tubes. If you are becoming male, the Mullerian ducts will break down and you'll be left with the Wolffian ducts. And so here's our picture with this, right? So here is some what we call sexually indifferent, right? This is not male or female, it's generic, right? So we see like the little baby rudimentary kidneys. We see the gonads. They're not testes or ovaries yet. We see two different tube sets, right? We see the Wolffian duct in green, and we see the Mullerian ducts in this like beige yellow. And then notice we don't have a vagina or a penis. We have what's called a cloaca, which is like a generic opening. So this is not male or female. Now, if you have the SRY gene, you go this way to the left. Those Mullerian ducts break down. You're left with the Wolffian ducts, which become your vas deferens. And the urethra will, and penis will develop around the urethra. If you do not have an SRY gene, you will develop female. And so the Wolffian ducts break down, and you're left with the Mullerian ducts, which become the oviducts instead. So big difference there, right? Big difference in terms of how we develop. It's literally just which tubes do you keep and which do you get rid of, and it all comes down to this SRY gene found on the Y chromosome. Now, there are other things that come into play here as well. Again, I talked about some of the analogous tissues like the glans penis, the head of the penis being equivalent to the glans clitoris. And so there's some other things that will overlap there as well. We're not going to really hit that too hard, though, in this particular class. But just something to think about, right? Something to think about. So, sexual development does not end in the womb, right? We change as we get older and enter into adulthood as well. At least we can say biological adulthood, so to speak. Or better words would be sexual maturity, the ability to engage in sexual intercourse and become a mother or father. I wouldn't necessarily call that adulthood just yet. But during sexual development at puberty, we're going to have some similar events happening both in males and females. The hypothalamus will release GnRH. GnRH will tell the anterior pituitary to release LH and FSH. That's the same. And we saw that when we looked at the last two videos, right? When we were talking about the control, the hormonal control of the gonads. So here are the hormones at puberty. And again, this is happening males, females. Right? So I'll talk about the generic stuff, and then we'll talk about the different characteristics and whatnot that happen. But we have gonadotropin releasing hormone going to communicate to the anterior pituitary. Anterior pituitary releases luteinizing and follicle stimulating hormone. In the testes, that will develop, help us develop sperm. It'll also help with the production of testosterone. In the ovaries, we see estrogen production in the ovaries and the follicles maturing in the ovaries. Again, both of those will use negative feedback to slow the release of luteinizing follicle stimulating hormone down. If we look at what happens in the secondary sexual characteristics, which they were listed for the most part in that previous slide, but really small. On the male side, we see the larynx is going to increase in size, and this is going to lead to a change in the voice. That growing process is not instant, so we do experience some short-term changes to the voice, which may or may not be embarrassing. We see increased muscular development, so we're going to see like the broadening of the shoulders. They're going to get taller. They're going to get more muscular in general. We're also going to see the male body hair patterning develop. So the ability to grow facial hair, right, to grow a beard or a mustache, and of course it's not equal among all, everyone, but we see more of that in the males. We see axillary, armpit hair, pubic hair, and the pubic hair pattern for males. We see body hair in general is increasing, and then this growth spurt around age 11 to 13 that will occur as well. And so this is also why we see males tend to be a little bit shorter than some of their female counterparts before age 11. Right, and we'll see that in just a second. Looking at the right, we see that on the female side, we are going to see a change in how fat is deposited. We're going to see that it's going to accumulate in areas like the hips and the breasts for breast development, and the mammary glands being able to develop. We see that the pelvis will change. There'll be a broadening of the hips. that we will see the growth of axillary and pubic hair. However, the pattern's a little different. Tends to be a little bit more sparse in the armpit compared to males, and the pubic hair pattern tends to be a little bit different as well, whereas males is kind of like a big patch. Females, it tends to be a little bit more triangular. There's a growth spurt that occurs from ages 9 to 11, and so again, around this age, like 9, 10, 11 years old, you may see that the female children are taller than their male counterparts, and it's not until a couple years later, right, going into like junior high and whatnot, that you see the males really sprout up and start to be able to tower over them. And if you're like me, as that growth spurt hits and it stops at about age 12 and you just don't grow ever again, you stay really small. But yeah, these are the things that are happening, and we're not getting into any really other details, so don't worry about that, because a lot of this is going to be physiology. So you'll have more time to sit with this. You'll have a chance to get deeper with this in the next class. And that's it, guys. That's the end. You made it. You should give yourself a pat on the back. I'm not being sarcastic or anything. You really should give yourself a pat on the back, and take some time to study up and get ready for the final.